Yeah, you got to love them and have standards.
It's a nice
And it's possible to do both.
It is possible to do both.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Gardner, and I am here today with Tanya, Paul, and a returning favorite guest, Ms. Tara Luce. Thanks for coming back.
Absolutely. I'm
And
happy to be here.
we always appreciate you making the time for us, but especially this week, we are recording the last week of school.
Yes.
And Tara is the principal of our lower school here at Spring Meadows, so she is not for lacking in things to do.
This is a nice distraction, actually. It's nice to come in here.
This means she
Yes.
doesn't have to do carpool.
It does, so I appreciate that too.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Today we're talking about what makes a great teacher. And I think we have just the right bunch because you've all been teachers, you've coached teachers, you've managed teachers, and you conduct teacher trainings. So I am really excited to talk about this with you because I think we're going to be able to give people really practical, actionable things they can do, whether they're teaching in a homeschool setting or a traditional classroom. So I'm looking forward to it. As always, what we're reading, and I don't know if it's changed much since we recorded last, Paul.
I
What's
have
that?
been reading lots of essays
Okay.
and outlines. Of
Are you
my
reading
students.
vegans' essays?
No,
I haven't
I've been
even
reading my
started.
students. I have not. No,
Oh, your
I'm just reading my
students' essays. Well, that's does that really count?
no, but I'm reading something.
Okay.
Also,
Okay.
Mitchell forced upon me this essay, "The Metropolis and the Spirit," just like from the 1920s, and it was all how people were worried about. Well, I don't know, the social scientists. I don't know who all, but they were worried about whether, as the cities got faster and faster paced, right, with the advent of the car and different things and the sounds, is man actually like designed to handle that kind of pace and that kind of stimulation of all the signs, smells and sounds and sights and everything. And I mean, basically, Mitchell's like, you got to read this because you'd agree with this, which basically says, no, like man needs to be in a quieter place, like the countryside, where we haven't been designed for the stimulus that the modern city gives us.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I've read like 3 pages of the 8-page essay, but so far I was like, oh, that's great.
And you probably feel like when you get, I know when we used to live out in the country, when just getting off the interstate and on that back road, the closer I got to the country, the more I felt, like a physical relaxation and it's quiet. There's no rush hour traffic. It does make a difference. And it's just peaceful, and being in nature with animals and grass and trees, that's really the way we were meant to be.
It is interesting though because I have friends that almost being out in the country seems to be a burden to them. Like if they come out and visit, like a lot of people, they're just overjoyed to come out.
Right.
But some people are like, oh my gosh, this was such a haul. And I want to sit inside in the air conditioner. I don't want to be outside, and it's interesting how like humans are so adaptable that even though, this was just, and they were talking about this 100 years ago, that the cities were getting to be too much.
Think what they think now.
Yeah. It's interesting.
That is really interesting. Yeah. Tara?
Middlemarch.
Okay.
You got to go first.
You got rid of
Yes, I did.
Love in the Time of Cholera.
Yes.
Okay.
Tanya gave me the spoilers, and I thought that they were wise in telling me.
She asked.
So now I'm just in Middlemarch. I'm not making way though.
It's also the last couple of weeks of school.
It is. I can barely think about Middlemarch right now. But it's still there. I still own the copy. It has a pin stuck in it. I feel like I will get to it, but not this week.
Okay, you wanted to go first because I always say the same. You always have to say the same thing as me. So, but I think this backfired on you because I have 70 pages left in Middlemarch.
I cannot win.
So yes, I am winning. I am reading the same book, but I also am winning.
Yes. Noted.
But I also, since Paul gets to talk about essays, I am heavy into our new Algebra 1 program, which is the most boring thing I've ever looked at in my life.
That's a way to sell the program, Tanya.
I'm just looking at numbers and just trying to make sure, I don't know this math. So I'm just trying to make sure that everything's lined up like it ought to be, that it looks consistent without actually knowing the content or what to do with it. So it is tedious, but it needs to go to the printer. So I count that as reading?
Well, if you get to do that, then I get to say K-6 math drills.
Oh man, we've spent so much time on those K-6 math drills, and those aren't finished. But
Proofing them?
I would like to say
just creating what they need to, what the final look needs to be, what they need to be.
I would like to say that at least my essays are more in the line of a book than your math drills.
Well, I was talking to Tom Sculthorpe this morning about some of the things that I found in the text that I was like, I don't know if these are right or not, but these are inconsistencies to me. So I was going through it with him and he yawned and I said, "You were yawning. You must agree with me that this is the most boring thing in the world, right?"
And he's our math author. Yeah.
He didn't agree.
Oh. Well, on to what makes a great teacher. You're all experts, like I said, but experts are made, right? They're not born. So I would love to know from each of you, how did you get your start in teaching? So I would imagine there's a variety of backgrounds here, just like, our listeners probably. So Paul, you want to start? Did you set out to be a teacher?
No.
Okay. Tell us more.
When I was in 6th grade, it was first year, my mother had put me in private school. I'd been homeschooled up to that point. I hated it. And so then I begged to be homeschooled again. And she said she was going to do that. And then the next year, she decided she was going to help the teacher, who was my 6th grade teacher, that I really didn't like, start a new school. And I was going to go to that school. And so this was it was a 2-room schoolhouse. My mom taught K-2, and this other lady taught 3rd grade through 7th grade. I was the oldest, so I was 7th grade, but she made me in 7th/8th grade because I could do 2 grades in 1 year. But I just say this. I do not recommend this to anybody. But in that room, there was 3rd grade through me, 7th grade. And obviously the teacher didn't have time to go do all the math with all the kids, or they could do like a 15-minute math lesson. But then when she was doing the next child's math lesson or next 3 children's math lesson, she didn't have time to go back to the 3rd grader and help. And so she was constantly calling on me to go, okay, help explain that to this child, help explain that to this child. And so I was constantly helping like the 3rd, 4th, 5th graders understand their math or whatever they were doing, their Latin. And I mean, that's really where I started learning how to explain stuff to other people.
Wow.
Yeah.
He's a very good explainer. He explains things to me all the time.
I started when I was in 7th grade.
Well, there you go. Lots of practice. He's like an old man now.
Truly.
and then it just, it just kind of never stopped. I was teaching right out of high school, whether it was Sunday school, whether it was, we did kind of like tutoring things, with my peers. And so I did a lot of that. So.
Yeah. And you started teaching at HLS
in 2011.
Okay.
13 years ago.
Yep. Okay. And you are with the online academy. You're the headmaster. So you manage teachers now.
Yes.
Yes. Have a faculty.
Spend a lot of time also going around the country.
Yes.
Helping teachers implement Memoria Press. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. How about you, Tanya?
I majored in English in college, but I didn't want to teach. So I went back and got my accounting degree. But then Cheryl Lowe asked me if I would teach. I sat in her Latin class for 2 years, and she asked me if I would teach her first 5th grade class. And I said no. I went back and got my accounting degree because I didn't want to teach. But then something happened in my life that totally turned it around. And I just suddenly thought, I do think I want to teach. It was really a bizarre moment. And so I told her I would do it. And I'd taught in church, but I'd never taught in a classroom before. And I worried about it all summer. I was scared to death. But then that very first day of school was one of the best days of my life. Really? I just loved it. And I thought, this is absolutely where I need to be. And so I would never have taught if it hadn't been for, putting my children. It's all been just providence, putting my children in her school and getting to know her, sitting in her Latin class because my oldest son couldn't do Latin. It all just culminated in this. And now here we are, looking at algebra. Yawning through algebra.
My story's kind of similar. I don't think I realized how similar.
None of us went into teaching. None of us had a desire to teach.
I kind of thought that, yeah.
No, I started, my kids were in HLS back. My daughter had just finished second grade and my son had finished kindergarten. And I was at the end of the year picnic. And the director of curriculum back then, Mrs. Tiemann, came up to me and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about teaching?" I laughed and I said, "Oh, no, thank you." And she said, "I'd like to talk to you on Monday." And I do what I'm told. So I went on Monday with no resume. I didn't even realize we were having a job interview. I thought we were just going to talk. So I showed up and when I realized where we were headed, they were like, "Do you have a resume?" No. I just kept saying, I don't know anything about teaching. And they say, we'll train you. But what I did know is that I loved the school and I had seen what it was doing for my own children. So they believed in me before I did. And then I thought, okay, if you want something from me, I'll do it. So that was 2011. So my little kids.
Oh, you all were the first year together?
I guess so.
Were you at Crescent Hill? You were at Spring Meadows. Yeah, that's why I spent all my time at Crescent Hill that year.
Yeah, I was in that first year that we had junior kindergarten.
That's right.
Here. Yeah.
That's right.
So
you were writing the craft book. We were after you to write the crafts.
I was writing in front of Mrs. Lowe because it's the first year that Mrs. Lowe's grandchildren were in school.
That's right.
So she just sat in the back. And she would literally say in the morning, "Why don't you teach A and 0 today?" Okay. All right. And it'd be great if you'd sit in here with us and watch us. Actually, that year, we didn't even start the alphabet in order.
That's true.
We started by writing stroke. So the kids learned I and L first, which really confused them because they're used to the alphabet going the right direction. So like 2 weeks in, she was sitting in the back. She was like, no, let's go A. Okay. So we did.
I mean, literally so many guinea pigs to get where we are today. It's a wonder our children really did survive it.
It is.
Oh, so Tara, what would you say to someone who wants to either build a great foundation for being a terrific teacher, or maybe they just want to equip themselves with more skills? Where would you have them start? It doesn't sound like it might be, go get a master's degree tomorrow, enroll in a program like a bachelor's or a master's. But I wonder what you would say.
I would say that's exactly correct. By our stories alone, I think there's many ways to get here.
Right.
I've known master teachers that did undergrad and get a master's degree. And then I know wonderful master teachers that have come out of their homes just with a desire to teach their kids. So I'd say it doesn't matter so much how you get there. It's really what you decide once you've made that decision. I think maybe it's a little trite to say, but I think it's such a hard job. It's an important job that you really have to embrace it. You have to want this because it can be thankless at times. So I think the first thing is, do you really want to do this? Do you enjoy teaching? Then it's just about jumping into the curriculum. And I'd say definitely observing master teachers or, at least, things like coming to the conference and being taught by master teachers. And then it's just that you keep on learning, that you keep stopping and evaluating yourself and then keep trying to be better and really expand in the curriculum and make all those connections. So doesn't matter how you get here, but I think once you're here, those are the things you really need to devote yourself to.
The first year is always not going to be as good as succeeding years. And it's always slower. It's teachers, first year teachers, if really struggle to figure out how to get it all done. Mm-hmm. And then you go back to them and they're in their second or third year and they're like, well, I've got extra time because you're really just trying to figure it out that first year, how to do it. You're moving at a much slower pace. And then once you've taught it once, it gets a lot easier. But the prep work, the first year is awful. And for the homeschooler, it's prep work every year because you're doing all the years. So, as we've said multiple times, we try to provide as much help as possible with that. But it's a job, and I think it's a vocation. I think teaching is a vocation, like the ministry. I just think that people who are called to teach and enjoy that classroom experience and enjoy that being in front of children, mm-hmm. because it is a very hard job, mm-hmm. and it is underpaid. Mm-hmm. And so why would you do this if you weren't called to do it?
Mm-hmm. What are some foundational things that a teacher can do in their classroom, whether it's advice you might give to someone who's at the beginning of the year or at any point? I can think of things like consistency or being prepared. I know there are some anecdotes we hear around here, like don't smile until December, or, are there just things that you would say, these are universal principles to apply in the classroom?
I think the one thing that really sets us apart and what Tanya was getting at is know your content, right? Mm-hmm. That's why the preparation is so hard. Because if you know your content, and if you can know it a little bit beyond what the text is going to say, then you have the tools to kind of light in the students an interest in that thing, right? Because you can be making connections and you can show them how this word comes from that word, or whatever, that sort of thing. That because the students, elementary school and up, they can read the text themselves, mm-hmm. right? So if that's all it's enough. But if you know more than that. Because I remember my first year teaching, I was teaching the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I was going, I went to a bookstore that was closing down and was looking for anything in that section that I could just buy and read more. So I would have additional information, just drop these little nuggets as we go through. And that really makes the students go, oh, wow. For one, it builds up your ethos. Like they see you as this is somebody who knows their stuff. But for two, you can go on side little tangents that's still on topic that and then come back to the main topic, and that keeps their attention without having to say, okay, like we have to take an actual break and, stand up and do jumping jacks for 5 minutes to reset your attention, which occasionally you have to do, kids. but just in the style of what you're talking about, if you have that additional content knowledge, you can do that kind of thing.
And it makes you feel like a much more confident teacher if you know more than you're teaching. I did the same thing. I bought every remaindered book on the Middle Ages that I could find. And before I would teach about any character in Famous Men or all of the culture that's in the literature books of that year, I read so many versions of King Arthur before I taught the Roger Lancelot Green one, because I read Ivanhoe because I knew that a lot of that legend was in Ivanhoe. Which I certainly didn't need to read Ivanhoe to teach the 5th grade, but it did help me. It gave me a foundation that I felt like I needed, and it did make me a better teacher. But it was a rough first year.
But that's a lot of things, like a lot of the teacher colleges and the prep that a lot of institutions will give you is not content based.
That's right.
Right. And that's what a lot of teachers are going to struggle with is, I don't remember the capital of Madagascar. You're
learning it alongside mm-hmm. the children the first year and even succeeding years. If it's a lot, if you're teaching every subject, then it's a lot to do.
And I would say too that once you have a good handle on what you're teaching, go back and look at the homeschool is different because they're teaching every grade and going with their students. But if you're a classroom teacher, go back. If you're a 4th grade teacher, find out what they're going to do in 5th grade and tell your students, okay, next year when you see this, remember that we talked about this theme today, or, and then go backwards. I have a 6th grade teacher right now who just started 1st and 2nd grade literature. He just wants to read all the things that they've read so he can kind of go back and just say, okay, but remember in 3rd grade when, you're talking Charlotte's Web, remember this. There's a really good way to see it here too in your Vade Mecum. So I think, expanding all the way around.
Absolutely. And we really encourage our teachers to do that, to go back and then go forward and really know everything that's surrounding that child's education.
What are the other qualities that you see in teachers that you're like, oh yeah, that's someone who's gonna
I think
gonna really make a difference
on gravitas, which I know
Don't smile.
Don't smile. Yes, but I always go back and read Mrs. Lowe's article on gravitas, the lost art of gravitas, because she says in there over and over, it's about seriousness, because this pursuit is a high calling. So it's not about being grim. It's not about being, too stern, but it is about taking this seriously. And you can do that even with kindergartners. I mean, you can have gravitas and you can love them through the losing of teeth and all the things that come along with little guys, but you have to remember you are preparing them. So I think people that can kind of really embrace like the importance of what you're doing, the seriousness of this job is important.
Because it is their job. It is not only the teacher's job, it is the student's job. School is their job.
But also the passion, right? Like, I mean, y'all brought your notes. If I had thought about it, I brought my notes with St. Augustine's Principles of Teaching, because he talks about in his work on teaching the faith, he talks about like you have to love the student. The student has to recognize they're loved, right? And that because it's a connection from one person to the other. Teaching to a connection, and so when that student recognizes that you want them to do well, but also that what you're teaching them means so much to you, and because you love them, you want them to know this, then that makes the whole learning process so much easier because they see the passion. And when you don't have that, when it's just, oh, well, we're here today, we've got to get this done. Well, the student's not going to be excited to learn anything. It really, they suck that energy, or they reflect the energy of the teacher.
In a classroom, that's difficult. If the teacher does, some people just walk in and they can teach. They just have the natural ability to teach, and others do not. And we have to drag them along. And really the best way to do that is to have them model other teachers that, who are masters. But, that fine line between, well, you told me that I need to, the students need to follow these rules and not to smile, which is really just a tongue in cheek, but some teachers take it too seriously. And so there's no joy in the classroom. It is hard work. We do require our students to raise their hands. We do require them to respect each other and to respect us. But there's joy. There should be joy in the classroom. But sometimes you get a teacher who's lost the joy because they're trying so hard to do what they're supposed to do. So it's really, sometimes it's difficult to get all of that and to show a teacher, and for a teacher to recognize that it is, you can have rules and still joy.
It's hard.
And sometimes they can't do it and they go away.
And we do have to be careful when we train teachers, that we're hitting like high standards, excellence, but also delight. And I know that, thinking of this, the end of this year, and we're all practicing for recitation, and these teachers are tired of hearing frogs at school. I mean, they have heard it for 101 days now, right. But we always remind them, you've been teaching first grade for 7 years, so you're a little tired of frogs at school, but this is their first time reciting it. So you must delight in it with them, and you must, just think it's their very first time. So it is hard to say, okay, high standards and excellence and routines and expectations, but make time for delight.
Yeah, I that actually reminded me, not to harp on Augustine, but he's he has this example. He's like, look, if you have somebody come visit you and it's the first time they've seen your city, you've seen that city every day of your life. And for you, all of that's humdrum, right? But they're going to see those things and they're going to be in awe at what has been built in your city. And you've got to find a way to keep that awe in yourself. And that you got to find ways to make all that fresh and new to yourself. Because otherwise, your friend's going to be like, this is amazing. You're going to be like, yeah, I see it every day. Like that just drags it down. So
we had a new teacher come on campus last year, and it was right during the conference time. So her room was floor to ceiling Memoria Press boxes. And it was her first time coming. And I walked her to her room and I opened the door and I said, oh, I'm so sorry. This is a mess right now. There's a lot of boxes. We're using this for storage. And she said, can I take a picture and send it to my mom? This is my first classroom. And I thought, oh, okay, yes, you can. And I have not forgotten that. When I walk around and I am in the weeds doing things, I think about what she said. She kept saying, I just can't believe I get to teach here. And I thought, okay, Terry, you can take this advice about your frogs at school and you can think about it too when you're in the weeds and you're doing the things that, okay, this place is amazing. And I need to see it through her eyes too. This is the very first time.
It's a privilege.
It's a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any practical ththings that sometimes you have to train people on? That I'm sure there are a lot of things.
Yeah.
But no, this is something that some people overlook, but it's always well received. It always seems, professional, and master teachers get this down.
I mean, I think it's being over prepared every day. Tanya's right. Timing isn't always perfect. You might have extra time. So what do you do with that?
Always, you should have more to do than you can
should. And your children should never, ever give you a suggestion on how to use that extra time.
No.
Ever. So when you have 4 minutes on the clock, you say, great, we're going to stand up and do some flashcards. You never let them be idle. Just over preparing. I think just being really organized, because we want immediate feedback for our students. So getting your grades done, getting your papers turned around and back to them, being a good communicator with parents. And just, setting that relationship up right away. We always tell our teachers within the first 2 weeks, send a positive email to your families. Because that way, when it's time to say, by the way, I had Johnny in the hall, they remember that, okay, but you really recognize that he's a great sport in PE and all these things. So those little things to build relationships are really important.
And that's true at home too. That positive reinforcement of students is really important, but also the consistency of your homeschool classroom too organization, all of that will make for a better days for the student and the teacher. I mean, I know I sit here and talk like I failed many times. But that was always the goal, was that we be organized, that we started a certain time. That I knew ahead of time everything that I needed to do and that they needed to do. But then, I would burn a pot of green beans on the stove or something and it would fall apart.
But what I'm hearing is trial and error is okay. Along the road. I
mean, it is. It is. And honestly, if I could go back and do it again, I'd do a lot better job. But when I was in the middle of it, I was just trying to get through each day.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is that kids need more help than I thought they did.
I agree.
I mean, I came in teaching middle school and I thought, they should start being responsible. And then you're like, oh no, I need to every day remind them, this is your homework. This is what you do. It's not. You just can't assume that you say it once and it's enough, right? You have to over communicate. You have to, depending on what age they're at, make sure they've got their agenda, that they whip it out, that they write it down, that they, that you're training them on how to take notes, all of those things. I mean, it's all stuff that I was I want to teach. I was coming from a mentality of I wanted to teach content. and there's all of these skills that I have to be helping them with, because otherwise they just can't master the content because they don't have the skills.
That's right. That is a big part of it. And especially, you
mechanics.
do think by middle school you should be finished with that, but you're not. For one thing, the content is so much harder. And for the other thing, people tend to be lazy. And so if you don't force them to do it, they're not going to do it. If you don't monitor it, if you don't do binder checks and workbook checks, they will become a mess. And when do we get over that? I don't know. Maybe college. By college, you really do have to take charge of yourself. And I think that's why homeschool students make such good college students, is because they're used to that self-study and that having to organize themselves and be self-motivated. And so I do think that's one. I don't think it's just academically that they're ready. I think they've also, because they've been more independent, that they also take to college life easier.
I would also say give accurate grades.
Absolutely.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, don't try to, I mean, you do want to be positive about, your child's working hard, but also you have to let the parent know where the child's actually failing, or where they're
Where
not
they need
meeting
help.
expectations, where they need help. Because I think in our circles, the vast majority of parents want to step up and help. If they know there's a need, they're going to step up and help, and make sure that the child gets the support they need at home. If they don't know, every parent that says, "Oh, 95, great. Okay, don't need to think about that class." Right. And so, I would just say, it's hard to give a kid a low grade. You love those kids. You want them to be happy when they get this paper back, but you have to overcome that desire to see them happy and you to feel loved by being truthful about what is actually happening.
So you can help them.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because progress is going to be hindered if they don't really know where they stand.
That's right.
Yeah, that's good. Are there any misconceptions that you've seen, or even maybe you had, about what makes a
that
good
school
teacher?
should be fun.
And that you should be a beloved teacher, a popular teacher, to go to that. I mean, it's really easy to stray that way and want them to really like you, but you can't ever stray into, I want to be their friend, or your job is clear. You need to lead them well, and you need to be honest with that. And I think the misconception of, I want to be a really popular teacher. I think that's a pitfall.
That's going down a dark road.
It is. It is.
Interesting. So what would you replace that goal with? What's a good vision for a teacher?
Kyle Yankee gave a formation talk at the high school the other day, and he told this story about how his favorite teacher, he said he wasn't the best teacher. He was his favorite teacher, and Kyle even got a D in his class. But this teacher was willing every week to sit down with him during his office hours in college and go over a short story that Kyle had written and give him feedback on his writing. And,
But he gave him a D in his class.
He gave him a D in his class. Like Kyle did not do well in the class. It was a Faulkner class.
Wow.
But he said he loved me and he was my favorite teacher. And even though I did not get what I wanted from it, a good grade, I knew that he was willing to sacrifice for me. And, was that teacher the most popular one? No, he wasn't the most dynamic one in the classroom, but he was the one that
took the time.
Took the time. And that's a huge, I think instead of trying to be the popular one, you need to be the one sacrificing yourself for the kids, and they'll recognize that.
They will. They will recognize that you're working hard for them. And as long as you're fair and that you do love them, that if you really do have to look at them and learn who they are. I think that's really important. And that's another thing that I see, especially with new teachers, but some teachers never really get that, where they're not really looking at the students. So they're teaching the content because they've learned it, they've worked really hard on it, they know what they're doing, they're going through their schedule, everything's on time, but they're not looking at the students and seeing, are they in the back row doing their Latin homework when I'm trying to teach the Odyssey? Or are they engaged? And if they're not, then what's the problem? Just to be, I think teaching in a classroom is like a dance. And you're either moving together or you're not. And to move together, you've got to look at them, you've got to know them, and you've got to know who the problems are and where they need to sit, all of those things. And then you can have a beautiful classroom.
And you've got to see the subtle cues, right?
Yes, yes.
This child's leaning that way or leaning this way. And what do I need to do to indicate to them that this is where you need to go back to,
Or this child is looking really sad today. And this is normally a cheerful child. And at that point, at break time, just to go by and say, hey, is everything okay? And it could just be they didn't sleep the night before because their baby brother was screaming, or, something as simple as that. But just to ask, to really know them.
And that is all predicated on the fact that that's why we insist on small classes.
Because
right?
we can get to know them.
We can get to know them. We can have that time. You're not going to have 15 kids that all come in upset on the same day, right?
That's right.
You might have a couple. You have time to get to a couple of them, If classes are too big, you just can't be the kind of teacher that we're presenting here.
Well, and I think too, that's where being over prepared comes in, because then you're not looking at your notes, you're not looking at your book, you are actually engaging with the content, but also the students. You're looking at them. When somebody puts their hands in their desk and you're like, back up on top, so you see those things, but you've got to have enough grasp of the content to be able to look up and look around and question and go back and forth and see all those little things.
Even when they're reading aloud, you have got to walk around that classroom, or they're not going to track in the book. They're going to be doing other things. I don't know. Do you have to do this in high school? Do you have to literally say, the only thing I want on your desk is the work that we're doing right now. This is what you need on your desk.
I don't do that because I want them actually multitasking between, like, have the thing open, be marking,
right,
and maybe
but
jotting down notes.
What if they have The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings?
I haven't had to do that, but I would absolutely say off your desk. Get rid of it.
That's because we've done it in the lower school.
Yes, and I appreciate
right.
that. The other day, I was like, a kid spoke out of didn't raise his hand, and I was like, you have been trained for at least 12 years of your life to raise your hand before you speak. What about that? Have you forgotten?
Today's the day.
They all laugh. They just, they realized, okay, yeah, you're right.
They do. They do. And it can become a joke. I always told my fifth graders, you cannot leave my classroom. You will fail fifth grade if you don't learn to spell separate and grammar. If I see either of those, not because they're any worse to spell than anything else, but they are my personal pet peeve. And so you will spell those words correctly. And so that becomes I meant it, but it's a lighthearted thing, and they did take it seriously because I really did mean it.
I wish you were still teaching fifth grade, because the juniors were having trouble with separate at the beginning of the year.
Well, that's ridiculous.
My goodness.
That's the word. When I see that word misspelled, I just think uneducated.
Harsh but real. We need to spell.
Mrs. Ross used to say that her class was not allowed to interrupt her unless there was a bear at the door or a snake in the classroom. And that was it. And it was a joke, but also not really.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
Yep.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, you got to love them and have standards.
It's a knife
And it's possible to do both.
It is possible to do both. And you would think that in our classrooms with our students all in uniforms, all raising their hands to talk, all with nothing extra on their desks, in the lower school especially, sitting up straight with their bottoms on the chair, both feet on the floor, that all of that stuff, it sounds like some kind of military camp, but it's really not. They are happy to be in their classroom with their teacher. And if they're not, then we do something about that. I mean, we have to have talks with teachers sometimes about joy, especially the teachers of the younger students. That those, because there is a difference. Those K-2 teachers are nurturing. Their children come up and hug them all day. My 5th graders did not
Sorry,
come up.
Not about my students come up and hug me.
Right. It's not right. It just changes. It changes. But those K-2 teachers need to be those children need that. They are in a strange place that's not their home.
Absolutely. And I mean, kindergarten, that's the year. Like those kids are just leaving mom and dad for the first time. They're in a classroom and they're away. And, there are some tears, but those teachers too still hold them to that line. Like Mrs. Colburn will give a hug, but if it is not the time for a hug, there will be no hug. It's not stand up in the middle of class. So if she's saying goodbye to them, she's sweet, but it's still that training them to be in a classroom, to be a citizen.
Right. Which is what exactly, what we hopefully are doing with our children too, at home.
Have we left anything unsaid?
No, I'm sure
This is a
there's
big
more.
topic,
I'm
so
sure
I don't
there's
want to
more.
leave anything
Yeah.
out. Okay. Well, it was a great discussion. Thanks, Tara, again for being with us and everybody else for adding your expertise. And thank you for being with us too. You can find Mrs. Lowe's article on gravitas at memoriapress.com, where there are lots of other resources. And you can sign up for our catalog where we put those articles. Again, that's memoriapress.com. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.